And hello, everyone. Welcome into the Bleav It Ole Miss podcast. Brad Logan joined today by Brandon Bolden. I don't have to tell Ole Miss fans who this is. Really excited for Brandon to be joining us today. Today's show is, of course, brought to you by our good friends at BetOnline. BetOnline, when the game starts, you can go to betonline.ag and use that 50% welcome bonus by typing in the code BLEAV, B-L-E-A-V, and that can get you into bet on all of the latest college football games, NFL, and, of course, Major League Baseball is wide open with the MLB divisional, or should be the championship series. Brandon, thanks very much for joining us. This is our very first time talking, and I have to get started with tell the fans right now kind of what you have going on and kind of what you're doing post-football.
Right now, still a free agent, so just kind of still waiting on a call. Getting ready to start a foundation, a Be Bold Foundation, to kind of help with early cancer screening for the less fortunate communities and stuff like that. And also, working on being a full-time dad now.
Well, that's awesome. I know a two-time Super Bowl champion. I want to go back to those two Super Bowl championships that you had and kind of some things that you reflect fondly on that.
Uh, the two Super Bowls were I have to attest that being at Ole Miss and knowing how to work with great teammates. I had great teammates those 4 years, and then make it to the NFL, and then I'm even more great teammates. And kind of just goes to, it was the strength of the team. In both of those Super Bowls, we were losing, we were down, and then boom, we still end up winning it. And it just kind of goes how we leaned on each other. And as Bill Belichick would say, how everybody do their own job.
Had the opportunity, obviously, to play at Ole Miss back from '08 to 11. I want to even go back further to back when you were playing in Baton Rouge at Scottsdale Magnet. And tell me a little about the recruiting process for you as a senior being recruited right in the backyard of LSU, but you chose Ole Miss. I know a lot of fans that wear red and blue are awful glad you did.
That was actually, it was, my recruit process was pretty fun. My recruiting process, yeah. My recruiting process started with Edge Oderon, actually, and talking to Coach O on the phone is, as everybody else would know, it's kind of hard to decipher what he's saying,
Yeah.
unless you see him in person. And unfortunately, he got fired, and Coach Nutt took the job, and they kind of honored that scholarship. And so moving forward with that, we talked weekly, and I went on my visit and committed that one day. He had my parents in love with it. I was in love with the situation, and I was very happy that I picked Ole Miss to go to.
Part of that back-to-back Cotton Bowl that Ole Miss was a part of under Coach Houston Nutt. What did you learn, and what did you take from your experience at Ole Miss onto the NFL when you've had a huge NFL career? But what are some things that you remember fondly during your time at Oxford about moving forward to the National Football League?
Um, learning how to, as I mess with my son all the time, learning to work well with others. When I was at Scotlandville, I kind of did everything. I played quarterback, I played receiver, I played running back, and then I made it to Ole Miss and I played running back, and I shared a backfield with some great athletes. I had Dexter McCluster, Cordero Easton, Devin Thomas, Enrique Davis, Rodney Scott, Jeff Scott, and I had a crazy running back room throughout my career. And then making it to the NFL, and kind of the same thing happened. I had James White, LeGarrette Blunt, Dion Lewis, Stephen Ridley, Shane Vereen. Started my career off with under Danny Woodhead. And it was just kind of, the more you spread that ball around and you feed off each other, the better the game goes and the healthier everybody can be towards the end of the season.
You know, the competition piece has always been big throughout your career. I think you just named off some really good running backs that you shared a running back room with. Do you think possibly that, sharing the running back room at Ole Miss kind of got you ready for the NFL, being able to understand the significance of your role versus maybe not being a number one or number two or number three back, but being a great teammate and understanding your component in the offense, kind of the way you were with the Patriots?
Oh, 100%. I don't doubt that at all. Especially just going out and just being a role player and knowing that your role could help the team in any and every way. That all started at Ole Miss, and it continued with Belichick and being with the Patriots all the way throughout my career. Being a role player is kind of something I kind of thrived in.
Even as a freshman, averaged over 5 yards a carry at Ole Miss. It never averaged below 4.8 yards a carry. Uh, Really good yard after contact runner. What are some things that maybe you can tell a younger running back that may be watching the show or listening to the show, or maybe even tell that high school running back, what are some things you can tell them right now, not only to get them prepared for college, but how to practice for college, how to prepare for that collegiate practice? What are some tools that you could pass along?
Most definitely, I could pass along. You just got to keep your feet moving, and you only running backs only go in one direction. That's always forward. And I know sometimes you got to make some moves, and you got to do everything else. But keeping your head down and moving forward, working towards that common goal of everybody's trying to get to the end zone, and you take all your teammates with you. That's the biggest part, and that's one thing I learned from Coach Nix when I was at Ole Miss.
And kind of staying on those lines of Ole Miss and what you learned there, some very successful seasons under Coach Derek Nix and also Coach Houston Nutt. What are some things you remember about Houston Nutt, and what are some games that kind of jump out at you when you wore the red and blue?
My first game ever, we were playing Memphis, and it was my first time actually being part of the Wildcat, and I was kind of the jet sweep guy. And my first play was actually the jet sweep pass, and it was thrown to Jevin Sneed. And I remember when we were calling on the sideline, Coach Nutt pulled me over. Hey man, don't overthrow him. Throw it behind him, as a matter of fact. And I just remember running as fast as I can. And I was looking, I was like, if I lead him, we can score. But I'm gonna do what he said. So I made sure Jevin had to stop to catch that ball, and it was like a 40-yard game. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And from that point on, he was always saying, if we ever get into emergency, I know I could put you in at quarterback. And in my head, I was like, don't ever do that to me again.
How,
um, love Coach Nutt. Great guy. He always was about explosive plays. And so anytime that we had some type of gadget or anything like that, I was kind of like at the top of that. Well, me and Dexter McCluster were at the top of that list of kind of those guys to get those things going.
Take me back to the game in which you guys went to Fayetteville for Coach Nutt's return game to Fayetteville. Do you remember that? And can you take me in the locker room and what was Coach's message? You know, Coach Markison and that whole a lot of the crew. Coach Nutt's brother came back and
Yeah.
came back to Ole Miss. Going back to Fayetteville, what was that like?
That was, I would say that was one of the kind of tremendous moments during that year, because it meant a lot to more of the coaches than the players, and they portrayed that message to everybody from Coach Shebus all the way down. It meant a lot to them, and some of those guys were still their kids, pretty much. So just going in and being well prepared for just about any and everything was by far the biggest advantage we had because Coach Nutt had coached those guys. So he had everybody's like what we said as a dossier on everybody. We knew what they like to do, what foot they like to step with, and so it made just the game that much easier. But the intensity level from the start of that game to halftime to the game was over with, it was very high. And like I said, they loved it. Even the strength staff, Coach Decker and those guys, they were excited too when we walked out of there with that W. So it was big for the coaching staff and big for the program as well.
Yeah, it was a wild game. I remember that game went into the late into the night, and Arkansas had an opportunity to kick that onside kick, and Ole Miss gets it, and they converted a long pass. It was a wild game in Fayetteville, but like you said, Ole Miss wins it. What are some other games that jump out at you? I know you had some really big games throughout your career at Ole Miss running the football, and even catching the ball out of the backfield.
A lot. One game, being back home in Baton Rouge, I tell a lot of the a lot of the young kids, because I remember I was coming out and we played LSU here. And I think I scored my first touchdown was on a wild rebel play. It was just like a simple counter play and I think it was like a 2-yard gain, maybe. And I remember after that game, my grandmother sent me the headline was Ole Miss allowed almost 30 players from Louisiana to touch the field against LSU. And that made a big story. And
Yeah.
so now when like even talking to my son and all my friends, it's like I feel like that team was a big part of the reason why LSU is heavily recruiting in Louisiana now because everybody in Louisiana was mad. And like I said, it was Mike Wallace, Kendrick Lewis, me, Kentrell Lockett, Jeremy McGee, Marshawn Green. We had a lot of talent come out of Louisiana that was playing for Ole Miss that was part of that whipping that we put on LSU that year. And that's one of my highlights because I like to see I like to see the kids get a chance, especially, right here in the backyard and they go get a chance. But I want Ole Miss to come back down here and grab a few of them too, because it is a lot of talent in Louisiana.
Yeah, you guys had a really big win down in Baton Rouge. I want to say it was 2007 or 2008 when it was a pretty dominating performance inside Tiger Stadium. As we know, the Rebels came up short this past Saturday against LSU, but they played really well. I'd love your thoughts. I say they played very well. They played really well, except maybe on the scoreboard in the latter part of the game. Played well enough to really get a really good lead in the first half and wasn't able to do so. How is it for you watching that game? And do you have friends and family that kind of tug you a little bit whenever Ole Miss plays down in Baton Rouge, kind of your old home stomping grounds?
Oh yeah, everybody calls me and is like, "Hey, you going to the game? We want to go to the game too." And I'm like, "I'm not going to the LSU game because I know that LSU game means a lot to those kids, and I don't want to be a distraction for anyone." Um, that 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 entire situation with LSU and Ole Miss is always going to be one of those big time rivalries, especially being right next to each other. And a lot of Ole Miss Rebels running around Baton Rouge right now, and it's kind of a sight to see when you see a license plate say Ole Miss and you roll your window down and give a good hotty toddy. That's always a great thing, a great feeling. Uh, but I thought it was an amazing game. They came out and stumbled a little bit in the beginning and then got things rolling and was very, very dominant for the most part of the game. They just have to finish. And to be honest, watching all these games, even with those big leagues, if they just finish a little bit stronger in every game they'll play, oh, they'll be a force to be reckoned with.
And before we get to your professional career, I want to stay along this topic. 5-2, one of the best rosters, historically on paper that Ole Miss has had. I'd love your thoughts on Lane Kiffin as a head coach, and then maybe your thoughts on this particular roster and what this team needs to do to get back on the winning track to hopefully, if you're an Ole Miss fan, finish out the remainder of the year undefeated.
Uh, I love Coach Kiffin. I love what he's been doing with the program. I can tell he has those guys bought in, and that's hard to do, especially with this transfer portal thing, which is new. Because when I was playing, if you transferred, you were done. Like you're not playing for the rest of the year, a couple years for some cases. So I love what he's doing from what I'm hearing from the players and the guys around the area. He's a great guy. Don't I've never met him before, but I've heard nothing but great stories from his former and current players. So I'm a fan. So I'm just a fan watching. And as far as what they need to do, like I said, they have all the right pieces. And what I really do love about how they play now is if someone gets tired or someone gets banged up, it's the next guy in there, and it's like nothing skips a beat. And I can really appreciate that. Like I said, being a role player and stuff like that, I'm accustomed to that type of football being played, and they just got to finish better. And that's and that goes around the board. I mean, I guess here and there, a few better plays could be called, and a few players could step up and do a little bit more. Like I said, the biggest thing they have to do now is finish, and I think that would make a big difference.
Let's stay there a little bit. Javon Patterson, as you know, I'm sure very well, played at Ole Miss, and he kind of oversees players coming back to campus. How has that been for you? And you talked about your relationship with the fans and how much you loved your time at Ole Miss and love the fans. What's it like to be able to come back to Oxford? And when do you hope to get to come back and visit with some of the fans again?
I actually talked to JP a few weeks ago, so I'll be down there for the Georgia game. So I'm really excited about that. This will be my son's first game coming back to Ole Miss since he was born. So he's excited. We're both excited actually to come back and kind of just see the new atmosphere. From what I understand, the stadium is different. How the fans interact with the players is different. So I can't wait to witness that and see that with my own eyes. But like I said, I've been watching. I talk a lot of trash, especially since I've been in the league, especially with the SEC guys. So I've been following guys for forever, and so hopefully we go out there and they get a W.
You've always been a crowd favorite with the Ole Miss fans dating back to your time at Ole Miss. And I'd love to take you back to that first Cotton Bowl. That was a huge deal. That was the first major bowl game Ole Miss had been to since the Cotton Bowl under Eli Manning and David Cutcliffe. What was it like being inside that stadium against Texas Tech? You had a huge game that day. And just kind of go back to kind of getting Ole Miss back relevant again in football.
That was amazing, and it was kind of one of those games where it's like I was glad to be a part of history. That was the last time the Cotton Bowl was being played in that stadium.
Right.
So, they kind of had all the guys hyped up with the history and stuff behind it with the days leading up to it. And then we get into the game and it's nothing but Texas fans, Texas Tech fans. So everybody is kind of turned to a different type of level getting ready for the game and just the atmosphere. And to see how the Rebels came out there, like came all the way to Texas, and it was more blue and red than black and red. That was a sight to see as well. And once we got rolling, once we got the offense and stuff rolling, made our adjustments mid-game because, even though Michael Crabtree was playing hurt, he was still kind of giving us a problem. And once we made those adjustments and kind of came out on top towards the end, the game became so much more fun. And just for those seniors and stuff like that too, that was a great way to send them off and kind of get the recruiting process going too.
This whole world of NIL has just changed dramatically since you were a player. What are your thoughts on the name, image, and likeness? And what are your thoughts as a whole, specifically in the SEC, about where we're headed in the world of college athletics?
I'm for it because when I was in college, we wasn't getting nothing like those guys are getting now. So I'm very proud to say that, we were kind of that stepping stone to get to this point because that was one of our main arguments is that's why we have a lot of players getting in kind of off the field trouble because we don't have enough money to just live normal lives. And so I'm very happy for these guys and hope they can continue to do the right things and make the right choices with this money. And we're kind of seeing the problem with the overpromise and then people not making the expectations and stuff like that. So there is a few kinks still to iron out about this new NIL stuff. But I'm happy for the kids. I mean, I wish I could have been part of it, but looking back, I think we went in the right direction to get to this point now. So I'm very happy for the kids these days.
I want to remind everybody today's show is brought to you by our good friends at BetOnline. BetOnline, when the game starts, just go online to betonline.ag. Put in the word Bleav, B-L-E-A-V. That will get you your 50% welcome bonus to bet on all your favorite games. And also use those Vegas casino games and have a good time there at betonline.ag. Brandon Bolden is going to be joining us for the remainder of the year. Next week, we'll get into the Oklahoma Sooners and what Ole Miss needs to do to get a huge win over Oklahoma as they sit at 5-3. What can they do to get over the hump? And we'll get Brandon's analysis next week. Brandon Bolden, thank you very much for joining us. We will talk to you next week, and we appreciate you joining us here on the Bleav in Ole Miss podcast. And we'll talk to everybody soon right here on the Bleav in Ole Miss podcast, part of the Bleav Network.